see my screen?
Yes, we can. Like it's still a black screen, but yes.
Oh, hold on.
Oh,
Sorry. Let me maybe should have done this before. Let's see, let's try sharing this again. There. Are we good?
yes, it has come up.
Okay, great. Fantastic. Cool. Thanks for the introduction, KP. Again, my name is Robert. I'm from the agency fund. Uh, what's a good background to this? Um, like KP mentioned, I we work we're primarily, first and foremost, we're a funder, but secondly, we often work with organizations to build what we hope is useful capacity around, not just around human agency, but also around practical ways to um, measure and improve the programs that you work on. So uh, today I will be going into what we often feel is like kind of the first step in thinking about in doing something measurable with each of your social programs. And it'll be around user engagement and impact measurement. Um, so maybe format just for sharing this information. I'd love for anyone to just stop me at any time with questions. Uh, I'm going to try to slow down, but I don't always do that. So if you catch me speeding up, you could also just tell me to slow down and we can go from there. All right. So uh so perhaps like going into user engagement and impact measurement. So they're kind of two very kind of distinct terms here. One of them is about getting the users of your platform or the program that you run really engaged in what you do. So oftentimes in this sector, sometimes maybe a government program is just like, we do these things to people and we don't really care or don't really think about whether or not they're like engaged in that activity itself. Um, so often feeling like how engaged the user is with the actual social program being delivered is, a useful signal to know whether or not someone actually cares, like, and actually is like invested in this social program. So it's a useful signal in that sense, but it's also necessary for you to achieve impact, right? So if you delivered a program and no users ever showed any signs of engagement with it, how could we expect it to have impact, right? So you can't just like send a text message to people and say like, I had impact. No, you have to send a text message to people. They need to respond to it in a meaningful way that demonstrates that they're engaged with it. And that's kind of how impact will be unlocked, right? So anyway, these are ways of measuring what I just talked about. So maybe we can start with a theory of impact. So I think a lot of us could maybe be reasonably equipped to make a statement like this. Like if we as a nonprofit organizations do X, then we expect that our users, do Y, and Z, the outcome Z of these users will happen. So very simple statement, but kind of captures this whole like what you do, what they do, and then what you hope will come out of that process. And to kind of provide a couple examples, like Rocket Learning and Nora Health are two organizations we've worked fairly deeply with. And the general gist of both of these, without reading them, is if we like provide them this education program, like in the case of Rocket Learning, then this will help facilitate learning both at school and at home. So this ends up becoming our kind of like our engagement activity. And then as a result, all young children will be ready for school and their lives thereafter. So the last piece is around, in a sense, like outcomes. We want them to be school ready. We want them to have the appropriate like numeracy and literacy levels when they're of school age. So kind of just have this in mind when we think about these user funnels, because a user funnel, in a sense, starts with a set of activities you do, then a set of activities that you hope that they do in response to what they do. And that's kind of the then part of this sentence. And then there are kind of these outcomes at the end of that process that will be part of our impact story. So yeah, so Any kind of questions there? Am I speaking too fast? Too slow? Anything? Okay. I'm gonna keep going, but again, feel free to gong me. So now we're trying to go from this theory of impact, very simple sentence, to something that we hope will be useful. Like you can't look at a theory of impact every day and be like, oh, I can look at that every day and make that useful for my program. Like we need something a little bit more like maybe a set of metrics tied to that theory of change that could help us make decisions on a regular basis. So this is the whole point of user funnels. So kind of the first step of a user funnel is thinking about your program and breaking it up into user progress across a number of stages. So we'll call these user states for now. So maybe the first stage is recruitment into your program. So if you have a chatbot, for example, in Glyfic, your initial entry point for your user to that chatbot. So maybe they scan a QR code, maybe they sent a message to somewhere and they get a link. But this is the process by which you find what's called the top of your funnel, where all your users will originate from. So kind of that origin point. So that's the recruited stage. The next stage is whether or not a user has been registered. So it's not enough that they just like get the link for the chatbot. They need to actually go in and maybe do a number of steps to register themselves on your chatbot. So that's, another very concrete stage. The next is being engaged. So just because they provided like maybe their demographic information or just said, yes, I want to participate, that doesn't mean that they've actually received anything from your service. So this is what we would call, at least what we're calling engagement, which is your first meaningful engagement with the chatbot's content or service. So this might be educational content, this might be health content, this might be, a number of other things that kind of is the beginning of the content that you hope to deliver. Sorry, is there a question? Somebody? I might have heard something. Okay. Please feel free to interrupt if there is anything. The next stage is retention or being retained. So this is not just getting that first piece of content, but making sure that they get a substantial enough amount of your content that you feel like is a good representation of your program. And maybe the way to think about the difference between engagement and retention is like, if I were to compare people who are engaged and people who are retained, the impact outcomes, the outcomes that I hope to affect, whether they be health outcomes or education outcomes or economic outcomes, we expect that the retention folks like have there's a big effect on them. And the engaged folks maybe have like little to very minimal effects. So you kind of want to pick a right amount of your content that you think is a full like representation of what you have to offer to your users. And the next, so all these 4 points are really about engagement. When we talked about user engagement earlier, these first 4 buckets or states are about getting people in and getting people hooked and like engaged enough to persist through a full version of your program. The next stage after this is after they've fully gotten your full program, the next stage is to try to look for a significant change in the user's like near-term outcomes. So maybe it's like test scores, or maybe it's like whether or not they had gone to the hospital again in the last month, like something, or maybe it's their health knowledge, like whether or not they like understand best practices for care for their newborn children, for example. Go ahead, KP.
Rob, what's the difference between like how do we get the difference between retain and significant change, because both are linked to an outcome,
Yeah,
like
so
recent outcome.
that's a great question, and so the main difference is retention really has to do with your programming, and a proximal outcome has to do with like something in their lives, like maybe their knowledge or certain health behaviors that they engage in. So retention means like, okay, let's say you had like 10 chapters of some program that they got through at least 8, 9, or 10 of them, right? And that you can measure within your platform because you know whether or not they actually interacted with unit 10 of your program. Significant change in proximal outcomes, the way that that data would be generated is you would maybe send them a quiz afterwards, or maybe you would send them like, or you would call them and ask them if they like had any issues at the hospital, or maybe you got like you asked them to report the test scores that they last did on their national exam or something. So it's something a little bit more outside of your program, but not necessarily, because like, for example, you could send them a quiz and you could technically think of that as part of your program, but it's really not your program. It's an evaluation of your program, right? So it's like kind of like a more of an assessment than it is like content delivery. So I would say that's kind of the nuanced difference, but you're right. There's a bit of like fuzziness there.
Yeah, got it. Thanks.
Cool. Thanks for the question. That's good. Um, and maybe this is kind of very related to proximal outcomes, but this is like a significant change in development outcomes. So this is not just like what you expect to happen immediately as a result of delivering your content, but what might change in the longer run. So you might get someone better test scores, but does that mean they had a higher chance of getting a job, or if they had a higher income? So these are really more long-term, and they're often things that randomized controlled trials or impact evaluations measure for. But it's also not impossible that you think about measuring them within your program too. So they're a little bit more longer term. So you have to wait a little bit longer to collect this information, but it's not out of question. So this is the framing. Like these are kind of the main buckets that we think of when we go from like a new user to where we hope they can get at the end of their journey through your program. And these are just useful ways to break that up into language and stages that we can communicate like across the sector with and within our organization. There's nothing like biblical about like this isn't like written in stone or anything. This is just a way of talking about these things. So program activities. So with every stage, like I mentioned earlier, there's something you need to do as an organization. There's a set of activities that you need to do, and there are a set of activities that you want the user to do. And in a sense, you want to, at each stage, measure both. Like, did we deliver the message or not? If we did deliver the message, did the user respond to it or not? So that's, in a sense, the pattern that we go through in each of these stages. So let's first talk about what you as the nonprofit organization or the social program needs to do. So for Recruited, for example, let's go through an example. I think this is probably the Nora Health example. You have a QR code that is shared at the end of some in-person hospital training. And after they respond to that QR code, you then send them a flow in your chatbot to register for your chatbot, asking for user details and consent to participate. The next thing that you might do is send infant care information and a knowledge check. So, you know, in a sense, like sending them information about how to care for their newborn or their infant. Retention, basically just kind of lazily sending the rest of the information modules and corresponding knowledge checks. And then maybe at the end, you do a really big like survey, like to ensure that they understand all of these things, like kind of in this assessment form. And maybe even further down the line, you do another survey of the health outcomes of the child. So not just like knowledge about these care practices, but also these health outcomes. So this is, in a sense, like the set of things you need to do. And it's important to be able to measure these. Like, did you conduct the survey? Did you send this information? Did you share the registration flow? And Glific, you know, I think the reason why it's so great to work with these chatbots or chat services like Glific is that these are all oftentimes like measured for you, maybe except for the surveys, but everything is kind of measured for you in the platform. And here are the second set of activities, the things that your beneficiaries or users need to do. So for instance, you can't just send them the QR code. You need to ensure that they can see it, they understand it, and they can scan it, right? Like that's like kind of a piece of information there. On registration, you need them to actually complete the registration flow. And again, when you use something like Glyfic, these things are already measured for you. The next is they respond. So after you send them the first set of content, that they respond to it by completing like a very quick knowledge check that you, again, send them on Glyfic. They respond to it, and all of that is measured. Retention is the same for maybe you set some threshold of them finishing 80% of the rest of the content. And then at the end, there's a survey that you also could send with Glyfic or maybe call them over the phone or whatnot to complete this health behavior survey. And they need to actually complete that as a signal of that proximal outcome. And finally, this development outcome. So maybe there's a child health outcome survey downstream that they also need to complete. So what we covered here, in a sense, like the different stages, things that you need to do in your program, things that they need to do to respond. And then we can talk about like, how do we turn these into like useful metrics? So what we do with this funnel is we, in a sense, do something very basic. We count the number of people who are able to complete each of these activities along the way. So simple count of the number of users. So first we start with, okay, maybe we got 100K users, 100,000 users recruited. Like we showed 100K users the QR code to sign up for the service. Then of those 100K, 80K of them actually decided to scan the QR code and provide their details to register. Then of that 80K, 70K then went on to do the first activity. And then 60K then went on to actually finish 80% of the content. And then maybe 40K of them showed improved, like they actually passed the infant care practice assessment, for example. And then maybe 35K actually saw a significant change in their development outcome. Sorry, go ahead, Jayesh. Or anyone who has a question?
चालेल ते पण चालेल मार्च एक
Maybe he's paying somebody else. You can continue.
Okay, nice. Sorry, I don't know why there's this thing at the bottom of everything. Ignore the gray thing at the bottom. So in a sense, all we do is count these things along the way. And again, like as I mentioned, you're able to measure these things in Glyphic. So it's really just like counting who responds to what and at what stage. And you can, in a sense, like classify all your users. So for any single user, you can say like they're at the retention stage, they're at the engagement stage, they're at whatever stage you feel like they've completed in your chatbot flow. So conversion rates are kind of your new KPIs. So let's say you're running this program and you want to come up with a set of metrics that you want to look at on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, be to look at to know how well you're doing. So what happens is as people drop off at each of these stages, there's a percentage of people that like make it from one stage to the other. So for example, 80% of the people went on from seeing the QR code to actually like registering themselves on the platform. So you have an 80% conversion rate. Your engagement rate of those 80K users, 70K of them actually engage. So that's like an 88% retention rate. So what you have here are percentages that can help guide you to know like, oh, where in my program are people struggling the most and where do I need to focus my attention, right? So this is what metrics are very useful, is to say that like, okay, we have all these things we can measure and it can be very confusing, but if we line it up in this fairly linear way and compute these percentages along the way, I can know where things are falling flat, because if I can't get them registered, how do I expect them to, like go through all my content? And if they don't go through all my content, how do I expect them to improve their newborn care practices, for example? So there's kind of this dependency in going down these set of states. So like I mentioned earlier, like you'd, in a sense, like target your bottlenecks. These numbers are actually quite high. And I only did them because like visually I wanted it to be accurate, but in hindsight, that's kind of stupid. But all to say that you'll see like, like maybe your registration rate is like 10% or 3% or whatever percent it might be. you would, in a sense, like look at your whole funnel, your whole set of funnel metrics, and see like where are people like dropping off the most, and then like what can I do to improve that? So that's kind of like a second stage of what I'll talk about in using the funnel. How am I doing on time, KP? I want to. Sorry.
Yeah, maybe you can take 5 to 10 more minutes. I don't think we'll be able, like you can
Okay.
just show
Okay.
the.
Cool. I will share with you the worksheet afterwards, and please feel free to ask me questions about it, but I don't think I'll be able to go through the worksheet today at least, because I want to make sure that we get to the impact measurement piece. So I'll share this link with you afterwards, and we can go through it at another time. But in terms of actually like using this funnel, so for one use case that we just talked about is this first use case around descriptive analysis. So you look for big drops in your funnel, and you might like look at, for instance, like what users seem to be dropping off more than others. And you might target your attention towards those users who aren't completing the content or aren't registering or whatnot. So that's like one way you can use these metrics, is just like we mentioned earlier, like looking for big drop-offs and looking at that stage and talking to those users and figuring out what's wrong. There's another one, which is often also called like machine learning and sometimes used in AI, but behind all of that, all those terms are predictive analyses. So that's when you use information about your users at some stage of the funnel to predict their behavior at a later stage of the funnel. So let's say there's certain activities or user behaviors that you collect on Glific that a user does during registration or during engagement that predict how likely are they to complete the whole service downstream, like all of the content, to get to retention. So predictive analysis, in a sense, can tell you ahead of time how likely is it that someone struggles. And this, again, is a good way to say that, okay, based on my predictive model, I know these people will struggle. So let me like kind of divert my attention to them. The last one is around experimental analysis. And this is, I think, kind of probably the most rigorous way to do this. But you'll probably hear me maybe in a future talk about A/B tests. And this is where at some stage of your funnel, you break them up into two groups, and you give one of the groups like a different version of your program than the vanilla, the status quo version of your program. And by breaking it up into these two groups randomly, in particular, like doing some randomization to break them up into these two groups, you can estimate how impactful that variation of your program is on future outcomes downstream. So future outcomes in your funnel. And this is kind of just kind of visualizing the same ideas here. So like for predictive, for example, we're using data from the recruited and registered stages to predict whether or not they will engage in the next stage, for example. And experimental, we would change how we do engagement, for example, in the engagement stage, and we would estimate that impact on retention and infant care practice knowledge and child health downstream. So this is kind of the different use cases you can use to do this. Cool. I'm gonna stop there. Maybe make time for any questions if you have them, or if not, again, like we can follow up afterwards to talk about these ideas in practice. Cool. I don't think I'm gonna go through this unless you want to, KP.
No, the group here is pretty much aware. Like,
Okay.
anybody have any questions for Rob before we hand over the mic to Fatima?
Yeah, sorry, this might have all been very like conceptual, and Fatima will actually give you a real life working example of how this stuff really works.
Good. Like Fatima, you can get started. If you have any questions, we'll take it again.
Okay. Thanks, Krishna. Thanks, Rob, for that insightful presentation. Please give me a minute. I'm just going to Yeah, I hope my screen is visible to everyone.
Yes, it is.
Okay, cool. Cool. So I am Fatima, and I'm part of the design team at the Apprentice project. And I'm going to kind of, walk through a very quick case study on how we kind of applied user funnels, also some design thinking, and which led to experimentation to enhance the impact for the tap for tap. Yeah. So before I get into the details, let me also very quickly talk about what is tap and what does tap do. So tap is a non-for-profit which is into delivering education to marginalized children in India. And today we are covering about 34,000 plus children across India. And these are kids from grade 4 to 12 and about 250 plus schools. And the entire idea is to enhance social and emotional learning, which is also known as 21st century skills. The AI leverage, so this entire endeavor is through a WhatsApp bot, which is powered by Glific. And the AI leverage in this is to give a very highly personalized experience because the content is, divided into different grades. There are different rigors within a grade. There are different subjects. So how do we personalize this content? And apart from that, there are other cases that we are slowly picking up, like a query resolution, because it's about education and children have queries. So how do we answer those queries without um, overloading the manual workflow and things like that. So that's where the AI aspect comes in. So this is about TAP. And then going further into the user funnel at TAP. So Rob talked about some basic, a basic funnel. And this is what this funnel looks like for TAP. So the first stage of this funnel is where the students are registered on the WhatsApp bot. And this happens via the school. So the program managers at TAP reach out to the schools and they involve the teachers, the school headmistress and the teachers to uh, pass on the link of registration to the students via the existing WhatsApp groups that they have. So that's the first step. And here we are looking at the number of students who register on the bot. The second stage of this funnel is activation. And activation here, what we mean is students clicking on the first content video that is sent to them, right? So that's the number of students clicking on that first video to sorry, is that a question?
No, you can continue.
And then followed by that, we move on to engagement. So here, what we mean by engagement is, so as to, when we are talking about learning, social emotional learning, we are assessing that learning when the student watches a video and then answers a bunch of quiz questions based on the content in the video. The video also asks the students to create an assignment, a small fun project, and take a video or a photograph of that assignment and submit it. So that's a submission. So we are looking at engagement, which is a combination of submission plus quiz, answering the quiz questions. And this entire learning module happens once a week. So every week there is new content which is delivered to the child through the WhatsApp bot. So that's what we call as engagement, number of clicks and the number of submissions. Then we move on to the last stage of the funnel that we are talking about here, which is retention. And here we are looking at the number of children who are making 4 consecutive submissions continuously, right? So that's what we call as a child who is retained with Tap Buddy. And this entire the bot is called as Tap Buddy, and there's this character which you can see here of a Tap Buddy through which we deliver, and the entire voice tonality experience is through this Tap Buddy. And if I have to just give some rough numbers, at activation stage, so from onboarding to activation, we have about 55% odd activation. And going from activation to engagement, it's about 26 odd percent. And retention is about, 12 to 13%. So these are the rough numbers that we look at. If there are any questions, yeah, please feel free to stop me and ask. So before we just check any messages. No, this is not a charge service. It's free. Yeah. So before we get into the how we looked at interventions and how we went further, I would just very quickly touch upon a research. So when we looked at this funnel, we said, okay, these are the 4 stages and these are the metrics that we're really looking at. So to dive deeper into, say, engagement and churn, so we identified these 2 as the primary metric we wanted to dive deeper into, because solving these were the biggest, if you look at the funnel, these were the biggest holes in the funnel. So what we said is, let's go on the ground and talk to children and understand what really leads to engagement and what leads to churn. So we did a qualitative research where we spoke to 32 students across schools in Mumbai, and it was like a 45-minute session where we covered areas like how does your day look like, the content they consume, because it's a WhatsApp bot through a phone. So if there are any other content that they consume, and then what are the interactions with Tab Buddy, like the different aspects into that, and then how do they perceive Tab Buddy? So we thought like this would help us go deeper into engagement and churn, and then help us resolve these aspects in the funnel. Right. So there's a question. I think Rob would be better, suited to answer that question. So maybe you can come back to it. Yeah, towards the end. Sure. So I will move ahead. Yeah. So the result of that qualitative research helped. So this is like what we got when we dive deeper into engagement. So what drives engagement is really the question. And then we looked at it closely, and we realized that these children, they are very much influenced by local content. So there are these, the locality that they're living in, the community that they're living in. There are these local influencers, micro local influencers, which have a following, and it's very interesting. Like students coming from, say, Dharavi, they follow. There is an influencer coming from Dharavi and telling them things. So they were very much influenced by what they said and how they spoke and the lingo and everything. Then there were these students who played a lot of games and stuff. So they were very much driven by getting rewards and getting seeing interactive elements like stickers and this entire gamification and emojis and that. So there were these elements which were driving engagement, and relatability was around how this bot So they viewed this character. They actually, like, the children would ask us that, is there really a Didi who is, behind this phone and actually answering our question? I really love it when Didi tells me good job and so on. So the relatability, the conversational tone of this, of how the bot spoke to them, really drove engagement and impacted the engagement. And then when we go further and looked into churn, sorry. So when we looked into churn, so we realized that what reduces churn, or what are the factors that impact churn for TAP, right? So one thing we realized is that the kids sometimes found the content very tough. So yeah, so challenge. So if they would find it very tough, they would just stop coming on and continuing to engage with the product, and they would drop off at some point because they would find it very challenging and tough. Then we realized that these children did not have their own phones and devices. So they would share their parents' phone, and a lot of times the parents would be out working. So the availability of the device with the children to complete the assignments, etc., was very less, which meant that they did not have access, and therefore that led to churn. And then sometimes we also heard that children were very fearful. So sometimes they would say that, what if this is wrong? What if I don't know the answer? Tab buddy will scold me, and so on. So there was a lot of fear. And then the drivers for churn is that they really like how, so this meant that how did these children overcome these things. So they had a very strong urge to learn. So because they came from marginalized income groups in India, they had this very strong drive to get out of their current economic situation through learning and knowledge. And they would all tell us that if I learn, like मैं पढ़ूंगा तो आगे बढ़ूंगा. So only if they study, they will, and they saw TAP as a way to, overcome their current situation. And so that's where hope comes in, and identity to become this, bada banna hai. So to become like a big person and to have a career. And social fit in is because a lot of people in the class were on Tab Buddy. So they wanted to also be a part of. So we saw this angle of community. That okay, one person is on Tab, if another, and we engage them, we create some kind of interaction, then it could have there could be a possibility to leverage that to reduce churn. I'm just going to pause here if there are any questions. Okay, cool. So now based on this, we actually to push engagement, we actually designed 3 experiments, and we deployed these 3 experiments, which was based on these research findings, and which allowed us to see, whether this hypothesis that these interventions or these, research insights, do they actually hold true. So what the first design experiment was that we heard that local, there were a lot of characters which were influencing them, and they were consuming a lot of content around it. So Doraemon was one character which kept coming up. So we said, like, what if we introduced Doraemon in the experience of the Tab Buddy, and Doraemon is telling you that, what, great job, awesome, it's okay, if they answer a question incorrectly, or Doraemon is telling me, did you do assignment and all. So we introduced a pack of Doraemon stickers, and we saw that is there an impact on behavior. Then, because gamification had come up, and they were driven by gamification, and there was a social angle to it. So there were points that were given for completing assignments and answering the quiz questions, but there was no view on the points. Like, it was not held together in any framework. So what we did is we introduced this message at the end of this at the end of submitting an assignment, where we're telling the child that you have these many points, but there is so much in total in that entire pool that you can achieve. So your total points are this much out of this many points. So there is a points progression that we were giving a view of to the child, and we were gauging is would that motivate the child to be more engaged with the bot. And then the third aspect is we introduce milestones. So if let's say if I hit 1,000 points, then I will get a silver trophy. 1,000 points is not the right number, but it's somewhere around 700 points when you'll get, the bronze trophy. If you hit 1,200, you will get a silver. And if you hit 1,800 or so on, you will get a gold trophy. So at a point where the child hit a milestone, we showed that trophy and we said like these are two more trophies to go. So this was an experiment conducted over a period of 4 weeks, which is 4 activities with a sample of 1,500 students. And we divided these 1,500 students into 4 groups. So one was the control group where none of these experiments were visible, and 3 target groups where each of these groups were shown 1 experiment each. And this was happening simultaneously. It was a randomized sample, and they were exposed to these design interventions. And then, so the first experiment led to higher submissions, like marginal about 2 to 3% higher submission. And because we were talking about engagement, we also realized when, after looking at data, that something that we should also look at is time spent. That, because Doraemon is telling me something, am I going to, apply myself a lot more and try to watch the video more and so on. So that was not there in the funnel, but later on we realized that that's also part of engagement. How much time am I spending? So we realized that both these variables were positive for the first experiment. For the second experiment, it was very surprising that, and that's where experimentation really comes in. We saw that the control group had higher submissions than the target group. And the time, because, so we did not really get clean data to conclusively say that the time spent was higher in this particular target group. So overall, this experiment didn't work. What we were just hypothesizing is that maybe because we are just leaving, the child and saying out of this much, we're not telling them how can you get it or so on. So we felt like maybe we need to think a little deeper about this particular experiment. And then the last one, the submission, the time spent was more, but it was very interesting. The submission was also more, but it was very interesting to see that none of the children reached the 3rd milestone. So what we realized is that there are a lot more variables in actually, making submissions or because, how tough is the content, etc. So we know none of the children reach the 3rd milestone, but the progression from no milestone to first and first to second was there. So this is how our first set of experiments looked like. Yes, Krishna.
Fatima, so with this, are you now going ahead with any one approach, like in this case, because Doraemon stickers worked well?
Right.
So you continue Doraemon stickers for everyone. Is that how it went?
So for this year, this academic year, so these experiments were conducted in the last, towards the end of the last academic year, and we specifically wanted to run experiments then because we were going to design the new program. So in this year, the activity flow has Doraemon stickers, so we accommodated this, and we combined these two. So these were previously separate experiments that you're only telling them that okay, you've got these many points out of this, and you were just only giving them trophies. So we thought why not combine these two and see if you tell them that you will get this trophy if you attain these much points, and this is the total pool of points. So we try to merge these two, and we're still awaiting substantial data to see how that.
Oh.
Right. There's also another question on time spent. So time spent is how much how active is the student on the bot. It's not only about the videos, but how much, how long is the WhatsApp bot open on the phone for this particular user, which includes everything like video, um, interaction, quiz, and everything, all of it.
I think Avni's question was, how do you measure that? Is it like last message timestamp minus the first message timestamp? Is that how it is calculated?
I think the timestamp of the first time, the opening time of the bot till inactivity is something like that. I don't think I'm 100% sure on this, but something on those lines.
That helps. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Yeah. Okay, and then these are another set of interventions around churn. Again, not all of it we've been able to actually do experiments around, but some of them we've already tried to incorporate it in the curriculum for this year. So, for example, what if we tell the students, because there's a lot of fear to fail, that, we have messages along with the assignment and quiz that, it's okay to fail, have an empathetic tone and forgiving tone. And commitment is, so this was around access, that some way, and this is something we now as a project are going to substantially take up, is how can we get the parents involved? Because parents are a very influential, like a stakeholder having impact on the students' behavior. So how can we take commitment from the parents to ensure that the child will spend X amount of time on the bot, so they will have access to the phone? And this is something we've tried to incorporate, so this is designing around hope and identity. So, beginning somewhere, try to relate that if you spend enough time on Tab Buddy, and if you do the assignments, and if you, complete everything, all of your assignments and questions, then you will become, this person, because they all have this aspiration and hope of that. So we tie into that. And feedback, this is around the challenge parts, because they've, we heard that they sometimes find the curriculum very tough. So if we can time and again incorporate feedback mechanism to capture if they found this particular assignment tough, or if they found this particular week's learning module tough. So this is something, again, so these two are interventions we've taken into, they're almost going to go live now. And we will look at data to see if that has had any impact. But these are not experiments. We've directly taken them into the actual experience. Yeah, that's about it from my side, actually. Yeah. Okay, I can see there are a couple more questions. Yeah, I guess that's for Rob.
Cool. No, yeah, happy to. Karen, I don't know if I am answering your questions here, so feel free to jump in. But I
Yes,
think
Robert, I know I'm spanning the chat.
no, please, no, this is great. These are excellent questions, and you're jumping into like next level
yeah.
stuff that's like pretty interesting.
We are trying to, I mean, we are very new into this journey of trying to engage our focus group with the bot. So we are very new. Unlike students, what Fatima talked about, I mean, TAP is doing wonderful work. Our groups are more, for example, we are not like, it's not a uniform group that we're working. We are working with different sets of groups. For example, there are self-help groups in the village. There are Anganwadi, which is a child and women health care unit in the village. So these are different groups, school teachers, ASHA, again, health workers in the village. So these are different groups that we're trying to work. And then now we are beginning to trying to engage them with the bot. So my question was, we are trying to understand that, I was trying to understand with the framework that you had given us, how can we take learnings from some large level programs. For example, you mentioned what you spoke was like the scale was 100,000. But if you're say, for example, we're working with 100, 500, those kind of groups, then do you think that this funneling exercise will make sense? But that is one. Yeah.
Sure. So that's your first question. Do
Yeah,
you want
first
to?
question. And second, then because it's not a big group where you're trying to then come from the stage of recruited all the way till the impact, all the way till the impact. So does it make sense to have a different funneling systems for a heterogeneous group? That's the question.
Yeah. No, I think the two are a bit related. So I'm going to try to answer and you let me know if I
Okay.
got there. But yeah, no, so whether or not, so I guess like a first question for these different groups, do you expect them to have different chat experiences, for example? Do you know what I mean? So like if the idea is that like engaging these different groups requires two different chat experiences, you might want to create like 3 separate funnels, for example, for the different users. If you do expect them to have the same chat experience and you just want to kind of like better understand or customize your program to the different groups, that's also possible. So let's say you measure the metrics, like the funnel metrics for all of these different users, and you can do like kind of subgroup analysis, basically like which users, which groups are dropping off the most at the engagement stage versus the other stage. But I'd say the choice between breaking up into different funnels and using a unified one is kind of a program question around how different do these experiences need to be. And if they're expected to be very different, then you want to kind of create separate funnels. In terms of the number of users, yeah, like 100, 1,000 is fine. I will say that like sometimes when you're in the realm of 100, doing deeper qualitative work with 100 people might tell you more than doing a funnel with 100 people. Does that make sense? Like funnels really come and are helpful when you can't talk to 100,000 people in person. Do you know what I mean?
I got it.
The qualitative
Yes.
information will always be richer. But if you need a way to manage
Yes,
your
yes.
program when it gets large, funnels are very useful.
I agree with you. Got it. I think that was helpful, Robert. Thank you so much. Thank you, Fatima.
Yeah, no worries. Clipsy?
Yeah, Robert, thank you for the insightful presentation and thanks to Glific also. So I have 3 related questions and a very small question. Number 1, with regards to what Fatima shared of children who have no access to phone, and we have similar experiences of our users in the area that we have piloted the chatbot and have issues about access to phones or the phones being with their husband. That's number 1. Number 2, in this scenario, how do we look at engagement? Okay, while I, as a mother, I still want to engage, but for whatever reasons, I'm not able to at that particular time. That's number 2. Okay. Number 3, then how do you measure engagement? Okay. So, this is the tricky thing. And then we still want to go ahead because we want to create a habit formation for first-time users who had no experience at all with an AI ML chatbot and something that's very innovative to them, very new, very alien, and all of that. So these questions are now around the engagement part that you spoke about. We are still not going into the significant outcome, but for now, not even retention, but engagement. So yeah, Robert.
Yeah, sure. I mean, as an engineer, a technology person, you always think like, oh, technology can solve all these problems, but you need to like be on the technology first. For better or worse, so that's almost like, how we have a funnel and at the top is recruitment, but if they don't have a phone, then you're dealing with the stage above recruitment, which is kind of how do we get them a phone, or how do we get them regular access to the phone, or how do we set up phone sharing so they can be recruited? So I think you're highlighting a problem that we're not directly addressing with something like Glific in a user funnel. But this is where kind of the point earlier with Karen around doing deep qualitative work and understanding people's barriers to even getting into the funnel in the first place is super important. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I'll just
I don't
add
know
to
if that
that.
helps.
Like,
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
so even that, like, yeah, at DAP also we're trying to solve this problem because this is a big problem. So we're trying to look at system design approach where, it's not just about in TAP, like in the WhatsApp bot, there are a lot of things outside the bot that impact the behavior. So we're trying to understand those barriers, and there are a lot of like offline design interventions as well that will help you to get them to engage more in the product. Like currently we know, like, okay, communication, like a lot of the students, because the registration is happening on the phone of the parent, they don't know only that, okay, this message is from TAP. So then, so when as a design team, we don't just look at the experience in TAP but in the product, but we are working with the ops team to understand that part. And then we say that, okay, can we just call them, or what's the quickest way to communicate about TAP so that they first click on that message to register, so they're like think outside the product as well.
Yeah, definitely. All of these practices you can also do outside the product. It's just measuring the metrics are a little bit more challenging because you don't have something like Glific measuring them for you, so, but the same principles apply.
Rob, I have one question on the way you measure the drop-offs at each stage.
Mhm.
So, like, it might sound like a very silly question, but say, like, if 100 people on 100K onboarded and 88K registered, and then it is 70K. So generally, like, when we measure engagement, is it like a very individual organization decision? Like, what's the percentage drop? Is it like 70 out of 100 or 70 out of 80? Like, I don't know
Yeah.
how Fatima measured, like, when you said the percentages. Generally, what's the market standard of measuring that engagement? Or is there any market standard?
So the spreadsheet that I shared in the chat, but also in general, measures both, to your point. And one of them is like kind of a more macro view, like, like if you're like a leader of the program, like you want to look at like total number, like, like all the way through as a denominator. But I think if you're different teams, like, a team that works on engagement and a team that works on, different pieces, like having those separate uh, conversion rates can focus the team a little bit better. You know what I mean? So you're like, hey, look, I'm only working with the people you give me. So, I'm trying to improve my rate, but so
Okay.
like you don't have to take into account the upstream problems. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm
Makes
working on engagement, you're working on this, you're working on that. So it's up to the organization how they want to organize themselves, but there are these different ways that kind of like make that clarity a little bit easier, that division of responsibility.
Makes sense. That's a great answer. Thank you.
Mhm.
Anybody else have any other questions? If you don't have any, please fill the feedback and then feel free to drop off if you don't have any other questions.
Great, thanks. I actually have to run too, but thank everyone for your time. It was really great chatting with you. There were these really great questions, and yeah, hope to be in touch in some way, shape, or form.